Hi. So, this video is going to be a bit different from my usual ones. Firstly, I don't have a script, so I'm just talking off the top of my head here. Secondly, you're looking at... Basically, you're looking at what I'm looking at right now, and we're both looking at the front page of fanfiction.net. I wanted to make a more long-form video, where I basically analyze, look at a story, take apart a story, see what makes a story tick on the fly, and put it back together hopefully better than what it was to begin with. And I kind of wanted to do this without any sort of prior knowledge of what I'm going to look at. And so my best thought for that was fanfiction. Now, I kind of love fanfiction. At least I love the idea of fanfiction. Sure, the vast majority of it is like kneecap fetish fanfictions and that sort of thing, but it kind of has this genuine authenticity to it. I mean, nobody goes into making fanfiction for the clout or, making money or fame or, selling out or something. All the time investment and the effort and energy it takes to make a story, it's for nothing other than the story itself. You have to really love something enough to make a story set in that world or with those characters. And even if most of it's trash, I can't help but admire that genuine love of something. So, at first I had all of these plans to generate a random medium or random franchise, but basically I think it's better if I just kind of think off the top of my head what I kind of want to do, and let's just see where our whims take us. I'm kind of feeling like analyzing a game fanfiction. See, I've always had this thing about stories in games, because they've often taken a backseat to, the mechanics or the visuals or everything else. A lot of the time the story is designed second or has less priority. Everything is put together first, and then some poor writer has to find a way of making it all make sense. It's not very often that you see a story be the forefront, maybe with the exception of, the old CRPGs of the 90s and early 2000s, or story-driven games like, Disco Elysium or something. You often don't see story being intertwined with the way the game is made. Like, what was that famous quote by, was it Carmack? Yeah, it was this quote. This is what I'm talking about. This is the attitude that most video game developers, especially Vizio, kind of take. Story in a game is a lot like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. That sentiment gets to me about video games, right? It's this idea that it's window dressing, or there's something that is just there to fill in the gaps. Now the funny thing is, I think story in Doom is told really well with the mechanics, the way it's put together. Maybe it's a bit serendipitous that happened because of this attitude. But that being said, I think it's interesting to see how people look at the stories in video games. It's funny, the way that a story comes out of a video game, it is quite unique to the medium. You have this level of interactivity and emergent storytelling that's different from, say, a passive storytelling experience. You create a lot of the story, which is why you take a Bethesda game. At least Skyrim and Oblivion don't have the most inspired campaigns in the world. But the storytelling that comes out of the exploration, the moment-to-moment interaction between AI, the visuals, it creates a sense, a feeling within you that, at least in my opinion, can be described as story. So, anyway, that segue aside, let's get back to this. Kind of wanted to look at a video game story, long and short of it. Now, just going off of this list, don't really have an idea of where I'm going to go. Why don't we take Legend of Zelda? One of my favorite games, game series, and I'm just going to pick a random page and hopefully find something on that page that will give me something that I can analyze. Let's just jump to page 60. Okay. This one kind of sounds interesting. When Link awakens from the Windfish's dream, he returns to Hyrule with hopes that Zelda can help him pass the strange feelings he still carries from Koholint's Island. Okay, so I don't think I'll read through the entire story on video. I think I'll just try and sum it up for you in a little bit of an edited down version, in the interests of brevity. So, if you've never played Legend of Zelda or know anything about this, I'll try and give a bit of context. Link's Awakening is a game basically where you're shipwrecked onto an island and you're trying to get off the island. And you learn through the course of the game that the island is a dream of a creature, something called the windfish, who is living in an egg on the top of a mountain on the island. And things called nightmares are keeping the windfish asleep in order to keep it dreaming of the island. There's a bit of moral ambiguity whether or not this is bad or not, which is something I really enjoyed when I was playing through this game as a kid. A lot of Link's games are typical fantasy. Not bad, but there's a strong sense of good versus evil. This kind of moral ambiguity that comes out of whether or not it's okay to wake the windfish at the risk of winking out of existence everybody on the island. They have no idea that they're a dream of the windfish, and you have no idea what that actually means for them in the event that you wake them up. So that's kind of the context of Link's Awakening. I don't think there's too much that you need to know about Ocarina of Time if you haven't played it, except for the fact that after the events of the game, your longtime companion, a kind of small fairy, goes away, and Link spends the epilogue and such looking for his friend. That's about all you really need to know, I think, at this time. I'll explain anything else that needs to be explained later, but as far as I can tell, those are the most important parts. So, I'll just read it and give you the quick rundown. Okay, so I've gone through it, and honestly, I think this is a great little story, and I think this will be great to just analyze and talk to you about. So the story basically starts at the very end of Link's Awakening. You defeat the nightmares, you talk to the windfish, and then you wake up in the ocean. Maybe I should stop saying you. Link wakes up in the ocean on a shipwreck, and the story explores this. Link is not sure whether or not everything he just experienced was real. I mean, was it just some sort of dying dream he was having? He's not sure if the entire events of the game actually happened or not. So that's essentially what the story goes through. It talks about the kind of sadness that Link feels from imagining that Koland Island was just a dream, even if it felt like a lifetime. And he has this deep sadness thinking about the fact that all of that could just be an illusion. And then the windfish flies overhead, which is what happens in the epilogue of the game. It flies overhead, and it gives him this contentment or fulfillment that, no, it wasn't all a dream. It was real. If the windfish is real, then what he experienced was real. He realizes that it's all real. And if it's all real, then they would be somewhere else. And there's a quote here: if the windfish was real, then something else would remember the dream. It would live on in their shared memories. This Link is certain that everybody is going to be okay. And one thing that comes up in his head, and this is kind of the inciting incident, is that he remembers Marin, who is a girl, a companion of his, through Link's Awakening. And it's obvious that he's got feelings for her. And Marin, the girl from the island, reminds him of somebody back home. So then the story progresses. He's back now in Hyrule, and he's meeting up with Princess Zelda. And now this is coming into Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time continuity. And he's talking to an adult Zelda. And basically, they're catching up over the years that he's been looking for Navi, his friend. The story basically goes through Link telling Zelda about his experiences on the island. And eventually the conversation progresses to talking about Marin, the girl from the island. And Zelda immediately makes the connection between Marin and a girl from back home, in Hyrule, called Malon, confusingly enough. And they both have bright red hair, and they both sound like very similar people. And, I mean, Link says, almost everything about the island the windfish dreamt up seemed inspired by what I knew, right down to the people living there. Zelda obviously makes the connection to Malon, and tells Link to go talk to Malon, which leads to the climax, where Link goes to Lon Lon Ranch, where Malon is. And Link talks to her, trying to jog her memory. And eventually they get to talking. She remembers him as the fairy boy that helped Malon when she was a child. Now, Link talks to her, and he's noticing that she's not like Marin from the island. She's got more tawny skin, she has a twang to her voice, she's got the build of a farm girl. And Link is trying to maybe wake some sort of memory of her being Marin by playing the Windfish's song, a song that he learned from Marin to wake the Windfish up. Now, Malon doesn't remember the song, and all that she has to say about it is that it's beautiful. Link keeps dropping these hints that he's in love with Malin. And eventually it leads to him having bought her a hibiscus that's exactly the type that Marin from the island used to wear. And the story ends with her putting it into her hair and Link thinking that he's just fallen in love with her. So the long and short of it is, it's a story of Link at the epilogue of Link's Awakening, waking up in a shipwreck, wondering if the girl that he loved was back home in Hyrule. And the answer to that being yes, Marin and Malin are the same girl. Now, there are some issues with this. The main issue that I get from reading this story is that it struggles with a question of how do you borrow from your inspirations. I see a lot of amateur writers struggling with this because you'll have all of these fantastic ideas, these things that you want to express in your writing, in your stories. There are elements, themes that come up, lines of dialogue, characters that are really important to you. But how do you actually put that into a story? How do you communicate that? It's the same issue that remakes often have. How do you actually show your inspirations? It's not easy because we know that we like something. We're very good at saying, I like this story, I like this movie, I like this book. But when you ask somebody why they like it, well, it's kind of this weird cognitive dissonance. You don't know why you like it. You don't have the vocabulary, the tools necessary without, learning about it to talk about it. So then you grasp for the superficial, the things that you can easily identify. Oh, I love Star Wars because of the lightsabers, the Force. And then the natural question arises, oh really? Did you like the new movies as much? And the answer is no, but they had lightsabers and the Force and Luke, Leia, and everybody else. Why didn't you like them? And you get this weirdly uncomfortable feeling of saying, I like it, I don't know how to say I like it. And then it gets even worse when you try and write a story, and suddenly you think the things that are important are the superficial elements, that the things that make Star Wars good are the Force and lightsabers. The thing that makes Jurassic Park good is the dinosaurs, or the thing that makes The Matrix good, guns and that sort of thing. No, they're the superficial elements. They contribute to it, but they're not the beating heart of story. Now, this story struggles with that, especially at the beginning, because the beginning is just almost a word-for-word description of the ending of Link's Awakening. There's no more to it, almost, than just telling you Link wakes up in the ocean, Link is drowning, Link is sitting there wondering what happened, Link sees the windfish pass over. It's not as bad as completely just ad verbatim telling you what happened in the end of Link's Awakening. There is an element of him being upset, him being lost and feeling a sense of loss, that perhaps the island was not real, perhaps the people on the island were not real, perhaps most importantly, that Marin wasn't real. And then the windfish passes over and he's got this contentment that it is real. It must be real because the windfish is real. That's the subtext to the text of the scene. That's good. It can be better, but there's some brownie points there just from actually trying to do better than that. So my next biggest issue with the story comes from this whole entire second chapter where he meets with Zelda. Why? Why is this scene in the story? Right, this is a short story. It's 6,000 words. This entire middle part doesn't do anything. Link doesn't learn anything. Link doesn't have any sort of insight. Link doesn't progress anymore. The arguments that the story is espousing don't go anywhere. Link starts the scene with the idea that he needs to meet with Malin back in Hyrule, and it ends with Link thinking that he needs to meet with Malin in Hyrule. Nothing is learned. And if that's the case, then this scene shouldn't be in here. If it has to be in here, then it needs to be reworked. And I see a lot of people struggle with this idea that the journey of character is the integral part of a story. Why do characters need to grow? Why do characters need to learn something? Well, the reason why characters need to learn something is that it's the most transparent, most surefire, and most straightforward way of showing your thematic argument. What is a thematic argument? It is the prime reason why a story exists. If you ever wonder why a story exists, it's to communicate some way of living correctly in the world to your audience. Now, how to live correctly, how to live well is unique to every single individual, right? Nobody has the same two opinions about it, which is what makes stories so appealing. You can learn about somebody else's way of seeing the world, but that is the central thesis of a story. It's a way of viewing the world. Without that, if there is no viewing the world in a story, then the story is nothing more than a report, nothing more than a catalogue of events, a series of things happening. It's what separates a story from a report. Now, this entire middle section is just a reporting of events. Nothing really happens. Nothing is really learned. I'll explain later how to fix this, but to finish off, the final complaint that I really have, and the main thing that really bugs me about this, the end of the story, the climax of the story, him meeting Malin, him giving her the gifts, the hibiscus, and the playing the song for her, it doesn't climax in any way that's meaningful. It doesn't climax at the argument of the story. What is the argument of the story? True love exists, true love waits, so what is it? It's hard to really pin it down to anything. So by the end of the story, all you've really got is this, oh well, I guess he's going to stay with Malin, which is fine, I guess. It's not particularly strong though, because at no point is he questioned, no point does he wonder whether or not that's true. You cannot just assert yourself. You cannot just assert your argument, because then you're just being sanctimonious. Then you're just telling the audience, this is what I believe, and all the audience can glean out of that is, that's what you think. It's the same thing as somebody just telling you, just sitting down and giving you a filibuster. Nobody wants to just be preached to. They want to feel your argument. So what you need to do is you need to actually argue with yourself within your story about your argument. That's the way to write a good story. So if there's no argument, if nobody ever tells him otherwise, if nobody ever challenges him on this, then the argument is not really being tested. The argument is just an assertion. So those three things are my main issues. And I'll show you what my story would look like if I was going to fix this. If I took the red pen to this is what I would do. Because I think there is a good heart to this. And that's the thing that I really love about fanfictions. They always have a heart, or almost always have a heart. Nobody writes from a point of view of not communicating something. So anyway, going back to the start, how do you fix this? Well, I think the easiest way is to look at the thematic argument. As I'm reading this is the story that comes out to me. This is a story of Link, a man who is in love with a woman and is coming to terms with the idea that she's gone, right? Marin, in my opinion, from my perspective of viewing the world, is gone. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't, but Marin in the game flies off as a seagull. She's gone. That's it, right? But Link is having a really difficult time believing that. And so Link, he holds onto this hope that back in Hyrule, the girl that he remembered from his childhood, Malin, would somehow be the embodiment of his love for this girl on this island. Right? And now we see a difference in the way that you approach the argument. In my version of this story, he doesn't know if the people on Coaland Island actually winked out of existence. In the original story, he's certain that something else would remember the dream. It would live on in their shared memories. My opinion is he has to tell himself that. He's not certain of that. How can you possibly be certain of that? I mean, it's a horrible thought, but what if he actually had to sacrifice the lives of all the villagers in order to rescue himself? If all of them are actually just winked out of existence. Now, imagine that. That's a really difficult thing to come to terms with. That would be my starting point for the story. Now, that would lead directly into the second chapter. He meets with the Princess of Hyrule. He meets with Zelda. And this can go really similarly. He meets with them, they catch up, and he talks about his experience on Coaland Island. The way that I would change it is Zelda could act as that dissenting voice to Link's idea that Marin's soul, Marin's being must actually be with Malin in Lon Lon Ranch. I would have Zelda tell him that maybe that's not the case. Maybe he needs to be wary that she might not be the girl that he lost. And Link might take that in any number of ways. He might take that badly. He might try and cover his ears and go, nah. No, I know that Malin must be Marin. Whatever way he takes it, it doesn't matter. Zelda, she acts as another side of the argument to argue against his argument that Malin and Marin must be the same being. That true love can transcend people. That her soul can be transferred somehow, or maybe they're the same person. And that leads to the climax, and the climax can be very similar. He goes to Lon Lon Ranch. He tries to introduce himself or reintroduce himself to Malin, and he has that same observation. Here, Malin has more fair skin than the islander, and sharp blue eyes instead of Marin's warm orange. Her features were plumper, yet clearly tougher, thanks to years of farm work. Malin's speech sounded like drawn-out taffy thanks to her countryside drawl, different from Marin's. Now, it's not just Zelda that's dissenting against his argument, it's himself. That's called the gap between expectation and reality. Link's expectation when he talks to Malin is that somehow he would be reminded of Marin. Somehow the similarities would shine through, not the differences. And when his own being is arguing with him, that he's noticing more the differences between the two than the similarities, that's himself arguing internally. So now, he takes up his next step to show they're the same person. He plays the Windfish's song as if it will awaken something in Malin. And it doesn't. All he can see is that the song is lovely. I mean, there are some parts where it's exactly what Marin told him. So now he's having this argument. Does she remember? Does she remember that the song came from her or not? And it doesn't bode well for Link's internal belief that somehow his beloved Marin exists inside of Malin, right? And the final climax is the hibiscus. He takes out the hibiscus, he gives it to her as a gift. And this is where I would make the biggest change. I would have Malin look at this flower and have her come to the realization that Link is trying to dress her up. Link is trying to make her something that she's not, right? And I would have her gently reject the hibiscus, reject the gift, and give Link that speech. He's trying to make her somebody that she's not. She tells him these things, not out of malice or anything, but just to let him know that she is her own woman, that maybe she has these similarities to somebody that he remembered once before, but she's her own woman. And that would really cement in the final thematic argument that maybe he has lost somebody, but at the end of the day, if you try to fit somebody to some idealized expectation of them, it could only end in misery and sadness. You have to take people for who they are. You can't make them somebody that they're not. And that can lead to an ambiguous ending. It can lead to maybe Link finally accepting that the Marin that he knew is gone. Maybe some elements of her exist in Malin, but they're clearly not the same person. Maybe he can fall in love with this girl in front of him, but first he has to recognize that this girl in front of him could be a different girl. Or maybe he can finally move on that way, somehow. That would be the thematic argument. And it would be a stronger thematic argument than in the original story because it's argued. It's actually an argument. It's an argument between Link saying, but they're the same girl who the Windfish drew from my experiences, right? That is a valid argument. But it's an equally valid argument that clearly Malin and Marin are two different girls, that they have different personalities, different temperaments, different memories, right? And at the end of the day, no matter how similar people are, no matter how fantastical this situation is, that perhaps Malin really is an embodiment of Marin, she's not exactly the same girl. He has to treat her differently. He has to treat her as a woman, someone else, at the very least. I think that's a stronger argument because it's argued, and that really is an important part of the story. So, you tell me whether or not you think that's a more strong story. This is just my experience of how to write a more compelling story. It's hard to really be able to fix your stories, to make them better, without knowing why your stories need work in the first place, at least from my perspective. If it sounds like it's a better or more strong story because of the changes I've made, then it's just adding credence to the idea that story is a skill. A skill like anything else, like art, like music, like math, like anything else. And there are foundations to each of these skills that will help you learn. The foundations might be more obfuscated when it comes to story. It's harder to find information about what makes up the foundations of story, but they exist. And I firmly believe that the foundations of story are the things that I've mentioned, building a foundation off of an argument, showing that argument through a character's journey being made from a specific flaw. In this case, the specific flaw being Link's refusal to treat Malin as a separate girl. He has a very sad, very real reason to believe that, the loss of a beloved woman, especially at his own hands. But it's a flaw nonetheless. That flaw leads to a journey. That journey leads to a moment of revelation. And that moment of revelation leads to an argument. Those elements are foundations of story. And with those, I think a much more compelling story can be written out of anything. Everybody has a view of the world that is unique to them. Everybody has a particular perception of the world that is special to them and them alone. Your life experiences, your memories, your stories, your personality, your philosophy on life, they will all color the way that you view the world. And that particular color is a beautiful thing indeed. We all want to learn from each other. We all want to absorb these things. It's by being exposed to people's different views of the world that we ourselves grow as people. I kind of had a lot of fun with this. I think I'll do this again at some point. I like being able to look at stories on the fly and just analyze them and show you how they can be better and show you how the foundations of story can make them better. I don't know if it makes a particularly interesting story. I know I've been rambling a lot. Yeah, no more content coming up soon. I've got a short story coming out soon that is more along the lines of my usual things. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, I'll have it out soon. Otherwise, I'm just rambling on. I'll probably drown myself out with some outro music. Have a good night.
いつかやむ